Jack Swing podcast. This is episode 10. Wow, goodness, man. Guys,
Wow.
how's it been?
Everything's been well.
Okay. Can you believe it? 10 episodes. It just
Yeah.
seems like it doesn't seem that long, but it just seems to be flying through.
Consistency is the key.
It's consistency is key, but also I think the topics as well. I mean, it's when you have your resident expert on all things rare New Jack Swing with Mr. Stevie Street, and then you've got your R&B historian in Sheldon Taylor. It's really hard to not to be entertained by the knowledge and the wisdom dropped by you guys. But today is going to be it's going to be a real tough one. When we're putting out the ads up for this, people were saying, "What about Prince? What about Rick James?" I mean, people got really territorial about who's makes the top 20, and I have to say, look, guys, this is an open list. This is not scientific. This is pretty much based on our personal preference, and and I would have to tell the viewers that this came about when Sheldon and Stevie and I were just having a conversation about how we thought about Devante as a producer, and this has been some of the. It's been great now for us to put this stuff in order. But okay, before we go, Stevie, any updates from the week that you wanted to share?
We got to wish Timmy Gatlin a happy birthday. I do believe.
Okay, Mr.
Happy
Guy
birthday,
himself.
Mr. Gatlin.
Happy birthday. Happy birthday.
Oh, that's yes. Timmy has definitely made a massive difference.
There's one new Jack Swing track that everybody should check out by a group called Duly Noted, spelt Duely Noted. Duly Noted. They got a new single out, produced by Jot Scott. I think he's worked with Blackstreet and others, an R&B producer. But yeah, it's very, very new Jack. So check them out.
Okay.
Speaking of Blackstreet, they just recently received the key to the city for Paterson, New Jersey.
Okay.
You know, the four guys are from that area. So I think this might have happened maybe a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I saw where I think it was Chauncey or it was Levi who had posted it. So all those guys are from kind of like the same area. I think they all are from Paterson. So they posted some clips there. So that was very good for them.
Yeah, it's always a hard one with the whole Blackstreet stuff because as much as because everyone would always still think Teddy and Blackstreet, but he hasn't been with them for good 10 plus years, and he's a legend of his own. So I want to celebrate the guys because they're still holding it down. Okay.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Yeah, they're the voices.
Yeah. Yeah, the ones who sang. Yes. And I've been seeing some videos from the Block Party, Jodeci, SWV, and Drew Hill, and it's looking good. I'm really glad to see Jodeci just all four of them outperforming. SWV, just like wine, they're just getting finer and finer, and they're just really holding it down. So it's just you guys in America are really spoiled with all these guys just touring and performing and actually getting better. It just seems as if they're investing in the tours and they're just putting up shows. And one lady that I wish I could see is Karen White. I don't know. Anytime I see her on tour in a show, it's as if she just puts, she's like a Tina Turner reincarnated. Just if you haven't seen Karen White, especially when she has a band behind her, she just gives it 110%. So shout out to Karen White. Okay, let us go. So we're going through ranking our top 20 favorite producers, and if we had and Stevie was right that we need to put a sort of time frame here because we start talking about Gamble and Huff, and then you start going back, and Philadelphia Sound Machine. You'd almost go. It'll just be insane. And then 2000s of just there's a lot of how things that happened then. So we wanted to get producers who really captivated our imagination between the 80s and 90s. And so we've ranked them into 4 tiers. So the bottom tier would have 5, then 3, the third tier, the second tier, and our top tier, we will have the top 5. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start off with our tier 4, and then we work our way up. And so I don't know who wants to volunteer to go first or to list their 5 producers in tier 4.
Well, I've stuck to the New Jack era, and I've gone from 87 to at a push to about 95, and all the New Jack producers I would look for on the credits of my LPs, CDs, 12 inches when I used to buy them all. So I'm going to keep because obviously it's the New Jack Swing podcast. I'm staying hardcore New Jack Swing producers, so there's going to be a few big ones, like say Timbaland that didn't make it in mind.
Wow.
So, do you want me to start with my tier 4?
Tier 4, yes, the 5 in your tier 4.
Right, I've put in my tier 4. I've put Jermaine Dupri's in there.
Wow.
Because around that time he was just cranking up. Really, he's really getting going. When he with Criss Cross, and he produced that girl group. I forgot the name. I mentioned it. Yeah, there was Escape. There was another one as well, even before then.
It was Silk Times Leather. It was a rap group. Silk Times Leather. Yeah.
So he was in there. Next up was, again, it's a real hardcore name. This Kyle Hudnall did a lot of work on Motown Records for the likes of the Girls, Yours Truly, that kind of sound. I liked his New Jack sound at the time. And then I got the Birthday Boy, Timmy Gatlin, because I know he did a lot of stuff outside of his own solo work. He produced, tons of different artists. And so then another hardcore name, Dealer Vance, as well as his own solo album. He produced for a lot of other artists as well, which we still try to get him on this podcast to talk about. But I just really enjoyed his sound at the time.
I mean, give any big groups that we would have heard of him producing?
Well, he worked with the Neutrons. He worked with the Isley Brothers.
Okay.
There's so many others. And finally, I've got Wolf and Epic. Wolf and Epic again. Worked with Sheena Easton. Did he work with Belle Biv DeVoe? Am I getting mixed up with what they called them guys? Spider-Man and Freeze. No, Wolf and Epic did work with Belle Biv DeVoe. Okay. But again, they did. I'd have to get the Discogs up. They did loads of stuff. So that's to start off with to warm us up into it.
Okay. So do you want me to go, or do you want to go? What's your?
Go ahead. You can go. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So for me, I wanted to. At the bottom of the list was David Foster, and as much as he's a massive producer and did a lot of stuff on the with Celine Dion and stuff. But he also did a number of big tracks in the R&B side, with Tony Braxton, to just name a few. So wanted to David Foster.
I tell you what, for those of you who are insomniacs out there, need to get a good night's sleep. Put together a good David Foster ballad compilation. You'll be nodding off in no time.
I'm gonna tell you. Yeah, David Foster was he's great. You talking about, and I know we're in the 80s and 90s. Check out the work that he did with Earth, Wind and Fire, and then when he creeped over into the 80s, there was a band called Chicago, and they were a holdover from the late 60s and 70s, and they were horn oriented. He turned those guys into like a powered ballad band, smoothed them guys out, and gave them a whole slew of hits between about 81 to about 85. And that's crazy to be a rock band, a rock jazz oriented band, and all of a sudden you're doing power ballads. David Foster was the man.
Denzel Foster and Thomas McClory. Now if anyone is
Foster and McElroy.
Yeah, McElroy. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so Think and Vogue. They're the ones who discovered, signed, and produced In Vogue. And I, you guys should check out my interview with Dawn Robinson. She has a different take about those guys when it comes to the money. But they also did the Tony's first album as well. So they really brought the new girl groups to a new level. After them
Massively
is
unsung, them
yeah,
guys.
okay, yes. Someone says that he helped produce TLC. Um, after that, the Neptunes. Now, you may wonder why they're that low, but the Neptunes, just because they were innovative and they did some good stuff, especially with some stuff with the Blackstreet album. But the sounds were very predictable, and I think they could have changed things around. Then I have Stanley Brown. He is an unsung producer. He did "I'm Dreaming" by Christopher Williams. He did "Tell Me" by Drew Hill. He did the production on Salt and Pepper's "Express Yourself." Did work, so he did a lot of big stuff. Stanley Brown, and at the bottom of the list is Timmy Gatlin and Wokey for the First Guy album, for the Keith Sweats album, Belle Biv DeVoe. I think Legends, Christopher Williams, Belle Biv DeVoe, Ralph Transvent. Yeah. Okay.
That's a pretty solid 5. That minus David Foster.
Okay. Sheldon, who makes your bottom 5?
Okay, my bottom 5 is going to be Devontae Swing.
Wow, he even made it.
Yep.
He actually made it.
Yep.
What the viewers tell me?
it.
The viewers don't know the joke here. Do we let the viewers in on the joke? Our private joke here. I don't know.
Yeah, nah, maybe not.
Maybe not.
Maybe not. But yeah, I'll
I'm
give.
surprised
I'll
you made it though, Sheldon.
Yeah. Barely by the skin of his beats. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So him, Jermaine Dupri is on my second bottom. And my third and my we doing 5, right?
Yeah, your bottom 5, yeah.
Yeah. So it's gonna be Devontae Swing, it's gonna be Jermaine Dupri. It's going to be like you said, Wolf and Epic, and then that's 3, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and then my 4th and my 5th is gonna be Vasal Bedford. He's worked with Aaron Hall on the Aaron Hall The Truth album. And then my 5th would be Freezing Spider-Man.
Okay.
Good. Even though, and those are my bottom ones, obviously, because of they all make great music. But for me, I guess the criteria that I set that determined why
what were your favorite Devontae Swing productions then?
My favorite Devontae Swing productions, Whatever You Want on the second Jodeci album, of course, the ballads on the second and third, on the first Jodeci album. I think he started out super strong, but just the momentum.
So why is he so low down for you then? What is the reason? Let's get into it.
Okay. The criteria is for me is okay. I'm looking at a variety of things. One, I'm looking at innovation. I'm looking at longevity. I'm looking at impact. As far as the sales and all that stuff, that's kind of like further to the side. But I think the main criteria is okay. Are you an innovator? Did you make your own impact? And then what's your longevity?
Well, I'll tell you what. I hear you on the longevity thing because for me, he didn't really get out of the 90s like a lot of producers didn't. Well, in terms of innovation, I feel from the second Jodeci album onwards, he was definitely innovative. Really had his own R&B sound that nobody else had. I didn't feel like he was borrowing from anybody else. All them sounds that he was making on them ballads, especially. This is why people rate Devontae Swing so highly, and they were so addicted to that sound.
Mm-hmm.
I thought he brought a new R&B sound, to be quite honest.
Yeah, he had like a lush. His style was like very lush, and he was the first producer, really the young guy that really turned people away. I don't say turn away, but redirected the attention from Teddy Riley. He was the first one. He was the first guy that really people like their eyes. They really woke up to producers, and and that's a hard thing to do because Teddy was super hot, but he's the one that kind of rerouted also that whole uptown that sound, that style or whatever. So it was just like I don't say he filled the void, but he redirected music fans and the listeners' attention to him. That was a big deal.
Sure,
okay, okay. Stevie, okay, you want to say?
In terms of how would you rate him innovation-wise, though?
Well, again, my criteria: innovation, longevity, and impact. So he probably would be 1 out of 3, maybe 2 out of 3. In terms of innovation, obviously, he's influenced by Teddy Riley, even though his music is like totally different. Um, Innovation wise, I think what he did was he created like a lush, a style that prior to that, remember when you look at R&B ballads in the beginning of the 90s, you really didn't have. It's kind of hard to put it in where I'll just say this: when you look at the innovation for people who were coming out with ballads during that particular time, they were dope. Sometimes they were inspired by the records that had come before, but I think the production, the arrangement of the ballads, it was more of the sound. When you look at everybody else who was doing ballads, it kind of like the voice was the thing that grabs you. When you start looking at New Jack Swing, the sound was there, but it was really a lot of the voices that really grabbed you, the strong voices. But for me, his production was the thing that really grabs you. So it was very lush. So even before you even heard the guy sing, it just really captured your imagination. It was so good. But the reason why, once again, I have him so low is because he didn't make it out of the 90s and he wasn't able to capitalize on his sound. Jermaine Dupri, people will probably wonder why he's so low, even though he has a longevity. But for me, he had help. There was a guy named Manuel Seal who really worked with him. Even though Jermaine Dupri was dope, and he's coming in and he's bringing in the younger groups, at the time. But for me, there are other people. I would say he has the longevity. He maybe have the impact, but the innovation, as far we're not talking about discovering groups, we're talking about production. If we're just going strictly off production, I would say he has a longevity, impact, maybe innovation, not so much.
I mean,
that's why
going back to Devontae, if you take the third Jodeci album, right, and take away the vocals and the songs, and you listen to the production, especially on them slow jams, there was nothing else sounded like that at the time. That's what I felt anyway. He literally perfected his sound. By about 95, he had perfected and innovated. Like a lot of artists and producers, they fall into like an emulation phase where they're just emulating something else that they've heard and they can't escape that. Whereas Devontae, I felt, like you say, he was definitely an innovator. And I think he peaked by 95. By the mid-90s, his sound had peaked, but the sound that he created, I just thought it was incredible. And he influenced the likes of Timbaland and that whole Basement crew. There's a lot of unreleased stuff from the Basement crew projects that never came out. That it's a bit of a shame, really. Some of the best stuff Genuine probably ever recorded, but we never get to hear.
But if you listen to, and he had a 4-year run. He had a 4-year run. Obviously, his high point was within his group. But if you listen to the second Jodeci album, it's split between his production, and then you hear the Timbaland sound. So you start looking at it's kind of like split half and half. But I will say between that 91 and 95, at a time when Boyz II Men were killing it in terms of the momentum, in terms of the sales, in terms of the big records, Jodeci was right in that conversation. And for a lot of people, of course, everything is revolving around taste. But as dominant as Boyz II Men were in terms of product, in terms of content, Jodeci, I mean, Devontae kept Jodeci in that conversation. So you got to give him that.
Sure.
So for that period between 91 and 95, they probably were the number one and number two groups. I mean, in that form of R&B.
In terms of Jermaine Dupri, I think he have a family member working in Sony Records. Didn't that
his
help?
dad,
his father was in Sony.
Andy made records with Mariah Carey, which obviously massively helped his career and probably kept the work coming. You know, I always felt his productions were a bit. There was something about the mastering, the productions that I was never convinced by. It's very, very the high top end of all them early records. It's a bit too high for me, but I don't know.
It's he did a great. Don't get me wrong. People are like, oh man, he did Usher, and again, you start looking at his longevity in terms of the breadth of artists that he worked with. But there's a moment in time, like, because you got to look at when he starts. Of course, he starts kind of
that first
in the late 80s and all of that. He comes out in the late 80s. So that between that 88 to maybe that, I don't know, maybe 95-ish window. But then what happens when Puffy's hot, then what happens is Jermaine Dupri is doing his variation of that sound from about 96 to 98. Again, I got to give him credit, remixers and the remixes and stuff like that. For me, that goes to his longevity. All that pertains for him to come out in the rap situation, to do the whole R&B, to bounce around, do the remixes, and you kind of jump on the Bad Boy sound, and then you're able to kind of do the Mariah Carey One Fine Day, which was one of the longest running number one R&B record. So the breadth of his scope, to be able to do it last that long. When you look at him compared to like a Teddy, Jermaine Dupri, his scope in terms of being able to work with a range of artists is right up there, neck and neck with Teddy Riley. But I'll just say for me, the longevity is his number one thing. Innovation, not so much impact. Yeah, I would give him impact and longevity, because now you're ushering in the young groups that are like, the Criss Cross and another bad, not another bad creation, but you whatever you're doing, Escape, you're focusing on like the young groups, of course, Bow Wow and all those guys like that. So I give him the longevity.
What about songwriting? I mean, he was on a lot of big songs as well,
But if you look at the songwriting credits, sometimes his name is on there, and it's a guy named Manuel Seal. And I think Manuel Seal was like one of the main guys, in terms of that, in that creation or whatever. His name is on a lot of stuff, but I don't know if he's actually literally writing the stuff, in terms of what it is, but his name is on a lot of credits. But I'll give him the longevity, and I'll give him impact, obviously, because the second generation of that Atlanta sound. A lot of people don't realize that Atlanta was R&B was what it was. It was R&B was present in the 70s and 80s in Atlanta. That was pretty big. But as a young producer, contemporary sound, I give him that credit for being like a catalyst for that. So again, it's innovation and longevity. Yeah.
Okay. Stevie, what about yourself? What's good? Who's going to make your tier 3?
Okay, well, just let's say good evening to, I can see
Theo.
Colin's listening live. Delicious is here. Theo's hi. We can see your comments.
Unique sounds, yeah.
My next 5, I got Foster McElroy.
Okay, you got them higher
They
up.
did a lot of stuff. They did Samuel, So You Like What You See, which is a big club classic, soul classic here, still in the UK. Samuel, the album didn't do too well though. It was just really that track that was big for him. And obviously Tony, En Vogue. Again, very unsung, them guys.
Yeah.
Gets really hard from here on. Really hard. Number 4, Chucky Booker.
Oh.
Again, for his solo work, the stuff he did with Troop.
Oh yeah.
I mean, he sounds unmistakable. It's very jazzy,
very
upbeat, very jazzy. I think it's an acquired taste. You know, I remember speaking to people going, I only like Chucky Booker's ballads at the time, not really into like the up tempos that he does. And I'm like, what? You didn't like Spread My Wings? You know, like, come on. I mean, Turned Away is still a classic.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Great record. Next up, we just spoke to Devontae. Put Devontae there again. He could have been further up. Next up, George G-Man Carante for his work with Colin England and Motown Records.
Okay.
Janet Jackson, Paula Abdul. He did quite a bit of New Jack back then that I kind of enjoyed, and he seemed to get a fair bit of work going into the mid to late 90s as well. Are we allowed to talk about this guy, or is he cancelled? R. Kelly?
No, he's not cancelled.
No, we can talk about him. We can talk about him.
You know, I'll never forget that. That record he made is a name for John Pagano. Some of you may remember the track he produced.
Yeah, I remember John Pagano.
Yeah,
I remember John Pagano.
The Swank It mix. I really like. Obviously, his own stuff was. I mean, I think my favorite R. Kelly album is still. I mean, a lot of people say 12. It's his first album for me.
Which one?
The one with Public Announcement.
Oh, okay.
Born into the 90s.
Yeah.
I struggled with that because I thought it was a rip-off of Guy, so he'd had the whole...
I love the album. So
says, yeah.
I even like the track he did with MGM, Why You Wanna Play Me? That was a very hard record to find. I was so lucky to get that at the time. It's just so hard to find now. But that actually, production-wise, sounded a bit like My Prerogative. So it was definitely on his Teddy. He was definitely his Teddy tip there. Oh, so what's he meant? Who's this? I can't pronounce this guy's name. Yeah, Suave, Rock Your Boots. Oh, you just reminded me of. I didn't put Portrait in my list. That's really bad, isn't it?
Okay, you got your
Portrait produced them. So that's my 5 anyway. R. Kelly, G-Man, Devontae, Chucky Booker, and Foster McElroy. And I'm going to throw in Portrait as well there. That's it.
Okay. So if anyone's just joining us, we're counting down our top 20 music producers, but we're starting from the bottom, and we've just done 20 to 16, and Stevie has just done 15 to 10, 16 to 11. So I'm doing my 16 to 11, and at the bottom of mine is Devontae Swing. I mean, he just scrapes into that list, and you know what? He
scrapes in. This is something what I'm hearing today.
From the first album, I love the New Jack sound, but it was pretty much not. You know, they were trying to be like Teddy, and Mr. Dalvin admitted that. But the ballads were so, they're very different, and he did his stuff around. So I'll give him that. Brian Alexander.
Hold on a minute. How does Devontae Swing scrape into your list, but David Foster make it?
No, he scraped into my top tier level 3.
That's got to be the dumbest thing I ever heard, man. That's another private joke, by the way. That's got to be the dumbest thing I ever heard, man. Viewers, wait till you see this upcoming interview. It's going to post soon. Nnamdi here gets absolutely roasted.
So I had Devontae Swing. Then I had Brian Alexander Morgan, because the work he did with SWV was a game changer. Great addition. Great. Yeah, he did some stuff. Brilliant writer. People do say that he didn't emulate his success with other groups, but I think he made so much money from the first album, but he was like, yeah, and he's not really fussed about it. And I think if you want to get an insight into why Brian's career didn't blow up, listen to the interview I did with Jay King, because was signed to Jay King, and Jay talks about Brian not being just the confidence and stuff. But that's Brian. Then I have Carl West and Albie Shaw, because they were a duo. So Albie Shaw was the songwriter and Carl West the producer, and they, they were studied under Teddy and DJ Eddie F, but they made noise on their own, not just for themselves. Tevin Campbell, just a number of different people. So big fan of Carl West. Then I've got R. Kelly. I wish I could have him higher, but the reason why was that when he did his own stuff, he produced his own stuff to the T. But I was thinking about people who could produce for others, and he did for Mary. He did for
Changing Faces.
Changing Faces and stuff. Yeah, he did a lot with other people, but
Ex-Girlfriend.
He did a lot. He did the whole Lifestyle soundtrack, but he was more an artist and producer secondly. But he's probably one of the greatest songwriters out there.
Oh, post that comment from Sabusi. I'm sorry if I murdered your name. Sabusi Siso Makosana. Just a Boo from Germany. I tell you what, that Just a Boo album is insane. It's like a New Jack album in German.
Wow. Okay.
So can you imagine a German accent on a New Jack track? The craziest thing you've ever heard.
Okay. And then rounding up my number 11 was DJ ADF and the Untouchables. And I put the Untouchables because I had to fit in Novell Hodge. I had to I had to include Novell Hodge and Dave Hall, and have to put them all in there. But because ADF created he did a lot, especially when he branched out. So DJ ADF and the Untouchables round up my top 11. Okay. Sheldon, who makes
so my next round? All right, it's gonna be Chucky Booker.
Okay,
he's in my next round, and when I think of Chucky Booker, versatile. That's the first thing that comes out of my mind, because when I listened to the first album that he did, it just was like listening to a concert. It wasn't typical of all the other albums that were out during that time in 88, 89. He had a lush sound, very musical, even, and he had a live instrumentation, and he had a technology as well. Very, very strong songs that he wrote. So versatile, extremely versatile. When you're talking about with Barry White being his protege, his godfather, so you kind of know, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. So he's there. The next person that I'm going to go ahead and work with it's going to be, like you said, I said Kyle West. I'm going to throw Albie Shearer in there also too, because what they did, they were masters at using technology in a lush way. It was almost like a Gamble and Huff that talked about briefly in the 70s, where they used live orchestras and things of that nature. Kyle West and Albie Shearer were masters of replicating that sound for the 80s and 90s, and it was very plush. The production was very lush, and I love what they did with Tevin Campbell. I love what they did, obviously, with their individual camp with Al's album, but it's just a very lush alternative to what everything else was out at the time. When you look at, obviously, In Effect Mode is a perfect example of that. And I remember the excitement at the time after they had done In Effect Mode, and people were excited about Key West. Like, they were waiting, Kyle West doing this thing or whatever. So I have to put them in the mix there. So that's two. A third is Dallas Austin.
Okay.
Initially, obviously, when I first heard of Dallas Austin, the sound that he was doing was kind of like in the vein of what Teddy was doing with the drum tracks and the swing and all of that. But for me, he really came into his own on the Boys II Men album and the TLC album in terms of showing his versatility, being able to do up tempos, mid tempos, and ballads. So he's my third guy. My fourth guy is a producer named Kashif.
Okay.
Kashif came out. He came out of the 70s of the whole R&B big band situation, and he was the first producer really coming to the mix on the R&B side to embrace all of the technology at the time. So we're talking about, when we think of Teddy Riley, we think of all these other people. This guy was a master. He was the one that kind of like ushered in that whole slick R&B sound that's extremely still in the 80s, that's still popular even overseas. He not only did he produce himself, he did some records with some other artists, Evelyn Champagne King. She was like the proto Janet Jackson. Records like I'm in Love and Get Loose and Bet You She Don't Love You. And of course, he was able to swing back on the ballad side and do the whole Whitney Houston thing. So that's my fourth. And then my fifth person would be Timmy Gatlin. Obviously, I got to go ahead and shout out his partner, Wookie. And I think that he gave obviously on the Timmy Gatlin side, the writing on the First Guy album was a masterpiece. And then being able to go ahead and then spread that talent on through Keith Sweat, Christopher Williams, and then with Belle Biv DeVoe. And I think it was Ralph Tresvant, Do What I Got to Do to Break Y'all,
Yeah.
So he really, I would say he gave those guys, Belle Biv DeVoe and Ralph Tresvant, a maturity, in terms of the balladry. I think that was his specialty in terms of that. They were romantic. They weren't derivative. So, those are my five there.
Okay. And speaking about Wookie, he just posted that he's just back in the studio, and he just posted himself. He just bought a sort of a soundboard or something like that. So he's saying he's gonna start making some music. So I'm still trying to get him on board. He's a very sort of reserved guy, but I'm trying to get Wookie on board. But yeah, he's trying to making music. Okay. Just before we go, Steve, do you know who this is? Carl Linger?
Yes, Carl Linger. Yes, I do indeed. I've got a few of his records tucked away somewhere. Well worth checking out. Some Dutch New Jack. Slight intermission break here. Tell the listeners about that interview you both did. What was he called? That Epic. Who worked at Epic Records? Who was his name again?
So T.C. Tompkins, he was, if anyone has listened to the Jack podcast, the awesome podcast, he was on there, and he was the general manager of GR Productions. So he was the one who said that they made over 20 million, and Teddy had no cash. But he worked at Epic, and he also worked at different labels, and. But Sheldon has his book, and Sheldon made the connection, and he is a very that's it. Yeah, he's a tough cookie. So yeah, he wasn't playing around.
The reason why I wanted to bring it to the attention of the viewers is because Nnamdi gets absolutely roasted by this guy. God damn! God damn! That's got to be the dumbest question I ever heard on a podcast, man. I didn't know at the time. I'm thinking, I don't know how I feel about this guy. He's killing our main guy here. The guy's putting him on the platform. He's killing him. But I look back now.
That was rhetorical though. You got to give him a little break. That was kind of rhetorical.
Yeah.
God damn, man.
Don't worry, hey, I'm finishing up the editing, so
yeah. Wait, viewers, wait for that interview to drop. It's a good one. Right, then we're on to what was it? 10 to
top 10, yeah. So from 10 to 6.
Okay, an honorary mention to a producer that didn't make it that I've just remembered. Again, very, very nerdy, geeky name. This one, well, bit bit hardcore. Martin Van Blockson. Look up a group called Modest Folk, headlined by Miss Deborah Killings. She was the lead vocal of that group. He did some production on that, and he produced some stuff for a guy called Lorenzo on Philadelphia International. Good New Jack Swing producer. Again, very, very unsung. Right.
Hold on. Shout out to Theo. Yeah, Chucky is way more funk. Chucky was he was everything. Chucky was very versatile. He could do funky music, as you can hear it on his first album. He can do the smooth R&B with records like Game, and he can do the very lush records like Spread My Wings. So very versatile. Absolutely.
Yeah, totally. Full Force.
Okay.
As well as the Don't. I think I enjoyed, in terms of New Jack Swing, the Don't Sleep album. Was that 91? I think it was. Don't Sleep. That's probably my favorite album by them. But they produced. I love the production on the first Ex-Girlfriend album, especially that group Ex-Girlfriend. And they did some great stuff for the Force MDs. Are You Really Real? Some of you may remember that record as well. I thought it was a really good New Jack record. Again, in terms of New Jack Swing, very unsung. Full Force. I don't know why.
Those guys were really great because they go back to like what Marquise 212 was saying. They had like a mini empire, man. Lisa, UTFO, Shirley Pepsi Riley, and the thing about it is that they made records, but the artists they produced, the records were bigger than the ones that they actually made. But because they had the longevity, they were able to go ahead and do the R&B, they were able to do dance, they would kind of do the hip hop thing. But then in the 90s, they were able to go off and branch off and do like NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys and Samantha Fox and all of that. So when you look at those guys, very versatile. Yeah, it's a good one, man.
Who's Barack Obama? I'm kidding.
Did you like the Highland Place Mobsters album?
That was the failed LaFace Records album, mainly produced by Dallas Austin. Which when we have mentioned Dallas Austin, haven't we?
I did, yeah.
She hasn't mentioned Dallas Austin.
He's actually he's in this top this five of mine. Actually, we'll get onto that shortly.
Okay.
Basil Bentford, we've mentioned him. We didn't mention Jade though. The record he did for Jade.
Oh, okay.
The big international,
very good record.
Don't Walk Away. He produced that record. He produced for LaRue, especially their second album, which is one of my favorite New Jack Swing albums. LaRue, Do It for Love. Is another duo that are very unsung. The Characters.
Okay. Troy, is it?
Yeah, Troy Taylor.
And Charles.
Yeah, I really like their sound. They did. Produced a lot of stuff for a group called Phase, Letitia. God, there's so much, but they were around that New Jack era, and you just, when you was buying that sound, if you seen their name, you'd get it. Right, we're getting some big hitters now. Get some very Jam and Lewis.
What?
Now, I wouldn't see them as a New Jack.
Okay, because you did. Okay.
New Jack, but they did New Jack style records for Alexander O'Neill, for Janet Jackson, Ralph Tresvant. But they it's tough because I'm looking at my top five. My top five did more New Jack Swing stuff.
Okay.
I think they did anyway. So Jam and Lewis, which I'm sure is probably in your top five. And obviously, lastly, Dallas Austin, Highland Place Mobsters album. That was a great album, that, for New Jack Swing heads. A bit left of center as well, a bit controversial, that album. There was a track on that album called Dirt Road, White Girl, which I think they had to pull. They released it as a single, and they were saying that radio or something wouldn't play it. So if you ever get to listen to that album, it's quite a gritty album, that, as well, at times. There's a track on it called Try My Love, which is pretty amazing. But obviously, the work he did with Another Bad Creation.
Yeah.
He did a lot of work. I'm thinking, what's he called, that blue-eyed soul singer that he did as well. He did a killer remix. I forgot his name.
John B.
No, is it a white guy? Robbie Neville.
That's John B.
Robbie Neville.
Oh, yeah.
Did a remix for Robbie Neville, which is just, oh my God, what a remix.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Okay. So if I go, so as I said, we've just done our top 20, but we haven't done our top 20. We've gone from 20 up to 11. So here's we're doing 10 to 6. P Diddy and the Hitmen, Puff Daddy, whatever you want to call him, because as much as people talk about, well, was he really producing stuff? But think about Quincy Jones. Quincy Jones, when he wrote music, he had other people play instruments. So think of Thriller and think of Bad. So Diddy knew what he wanted to hear, and he got people to play the stuff. But he was the producer when it came to the style and the sound.
So you like his stuff from the mid-90s to the late 90s then?
But you know what? He was heavily influenced in Mary's first album.
Yeah.
And then on My Life album as well. So, I just think about his influence on sound. So I just have to give him credit. I wish I could have taken him higher, but that I think, yeah, he makes that at number 10. Then Timbaland. As much as I want to put him higher, he was just, he was his drum beats were just so distinctive. What has kept him from being higher is because a lot of stuff that he did with Aaliyah and others, and even Genuine, Static was involved with that, and so Static, as a writer and producer, and I wish I could have put Static in there. But Timbaland has just been consistent for a long time. But as I said,
you don't seem to rate his work with Aaliyah, which for me is his best work.
Yeah, but no, Static did some good stuff with Aaliyah. So sometimes you may hear Try Again and not realize it was Static, not Timbaland. But
it's like he kind of like
about the One in a Million album,
kind of like hand in hand.
The work that he did on the One in a Million album.
Yes, yeah. I mean, yeah. But as I said,
that's Try Again. I think no. Try Again is later. I'm sorry.
Timbaland's in my top 10. But as I said, I probably couldn't. I would have tried to put him higher. But I just felt that he did get mentored by Devontae, but he grew into his own, and he's an innovator. So yeah, that's Timbaland's in there. I put Jermaine Dupri before ahead of him, and because longevity, Jermaine started younger. Started with he started longer, but he did the hip hop, he did R&B, he created his own sound, his own sort of label, and then produced other stuff like you mentioned with Mariah. Stuff he's done with he took Usher from what Puffy did and just made him a superstar. And Jermaine talks about being a hip hop person, and even when he writes his songs, it's about a rap. So Jermaine changed the game, and but he always gives credit to Teddy and stuff. But Jermaine changed the game. Then I've got Mr. Jerkins, Darkchild, and he's been. If you think about somebody who started so young, 15, 16, and he was so good that Teddy just said, okay, gave him stuff to do, whether it was Men of Vision. I don't know how many people realize that Rodney Jerkins produced Joe's Don't Want to Be a Player when he was probably around 16, 17. So
what number have you got him there at?
I've got Rodney at number 8. Not 5, 7.
At
number 7.
Once he finds that out, because you've got him on speed dial. Once he finds that out, he's giving you an interview on your platform, and you've only put him at number 8.
It was.
He's not going to be happy now. He's not going to be happy.
I mean, if you think about all the people that we missed out, but and then as I said, he's still making beats now. But we were going from 80s to 90s, so he really was covering the 90s. So if I'd gone up to 2000s. He would have gone much higher.
I'm going to give you an artist name that I feel you should check out that Rodney Jerkins produced that never seems to get mentioned anymore. A guy called Jay Quest. The Quest is On is the album produced by Rodney Jerkins and Jerkins. That's some of his best work. Oh, he released that, and in the same year, there was an album by Veronica as well that he worked on. Them two albums. They
I
were
remember her.
Were they on not Capitol? What's that label they were on? Was it Capitol Records? I'd have to look at the CDs again, but both very unsung early Rodney Jerkins work.
You know, he would have been high. And in fact, this list is he wouldn't have made my top 5 just because of the people I put in my top 5, but his positioning in my top 10 sort of shifted around. And the reason why I put Dallas Austin at the last of level 2 was because of, you know, Dallas as a young prodigy came out the bat swinging, you know, TLC, that whole What About My Friends, the whole TLC sound, Another Bad Creation we talked about. You know, he did stuff with Monica. He, you know, did stuff with Madonna. He was just a very different, unique kind of person with his sound. But he was a young prodigy as well. You know, Sheldon talks about Joyce Irby, who mentored him and stuff like that. But he got pulled in different directions, and Gene Griffin comes in and pulls him here and there. Michael Bivins comes in and there. But, you know, he gave them their sound. You know, he did stuff with Boyz II Men, Motown Philly. So yeah, he's as I said, this is 80s to 90s. So I really had to put Dallas up there because I think he doesn't seem to get the recognition that a lot of other people get, because he's not a very social media person. He's not up in the videos. He does his stuff behind the scenes and stuff. So that's why he tends to get forgotten. So that's what Dallas Austin rounds up my top 10.
Yeah, when I look at Dallas Austin, Dallas Austin went ahead and did some records with Madonna. He did some records with Madonna. That was really big. I think it was Nighttime, Bedtime Stories, or whatever that is.
Yeah.
But a lot of the artists, I'm going to tell you, man, is that when you look at producers, sometimes the notoriety kind of like sometimes it overshadows the music because they're, even though they're not at the forefront, you know, they're still behind the scenes doing great work. But it's just that ever since then, that New Jack era, when you start seeing the producers started to take the forefront, when we stopped hearing from producers and whatnot, we just thought, okay, yeah. But yeah, he's very, very talented, very versatile. So when I look at his window, I would say probably, you know, from the time he got on the Joyce Irby, we talking about maybe 87. I would say maybe 87 till probably about maybe he had 10 years. I'll say he had a good 10-year run. 87 to 97, maybe going into the 2000s or whatever, because obviously he worked on the TLC albums after the fact. So I would say I would give him a good 87 to 2000. So definitely.
Well, after in the early 2000s, he was doing a lot of pop records, wasn't he? He did a lot of.
Yeah, but you know, he was given a label by Clive, and he didn't want a label. You know, it was almost like they wanted him to become. You know, Clive wanted him to have his Rowdy Records, and so he can. And he didn't. He just didn't want the
Babes. You know? Do you know he did the Sugar Babes in this country, in the UK?
I know the Sugar Babes. Did he do the work with them?
Yeah, he did. What's that? Push the button. I think he produced that record.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize
with Trisha McNeil.
Okay.
So he did quite a bit of pop here as well.
Yeah. So then he went into movies and stuff.
And that's pretty smart, though.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That's pretty smart, though, because, you know, a lot of folks would have jumped at a label, man, but his strength is in the composing and the creation of music, man. Sometimes that business aspect of it, that can be a headache, and that can stunt your.
He did basically what Timbaland did,
you know, your creative juices.
He did. Yeah, you know, because what he was saying was that, you know what, they gave him a label, they gave him a label out in New York, and it was like, yeah, here's your staff, here's the budget, and he had to start thinking about all that stuff, and it took away from his creativity. So he you know, the moment that left, you know, he didn't want that and stuff, and he's a sort of a free spirit kind of thing. But anyway, so yeah, Dallas, as I said, just because of the timing, if we'd went 90s to 2000, Rodney would have been ahead of him, but because it's 90s to 80s to 90s. Yes, Sheldon, your your 10 to 6.
All right, my 10 to 6. Okay, so the next one I'm gonna throw a curveball at you because we talk about a lot of male producers, but we rarely talk about female producers. And for a lot of our platform listeners, they may not be familiar with her, but this person, her name is Angela Winbush, and
Wow.
her run was like 83, 84 to like around like 97. And not only did she was in a duel with a group, her
Renee and Andrew.
Renee and Angela or whatever. So she was a strong writer and producer throughout the 80s. Yeah, Renee and Angela. And one of the records you might be familiar with, there was a record that Jay-Z sampled. One of their records is called I'll Be. It was based off a record called I'll Be Good. It was a fast up-tempo record, but they were very good for doing the ballads. That's the one. That's her. So if you go back and listen to the catalog of Renee Angela, and then she became a solo artist. And then one of the things is when we look at like the Ozzy brothers, for them to go ahead and come back on the longevity side, she's the catalyst for that. Because when the Ozzy brothers split up and the younger brothers were the ones who were writing and producing all the records, she filled in the gap. So before we look at R. Kelly bringing the Ozzy brothers back in a big way, she did it first. So as a female producer and also can play multiple instruments, got to give her that credit. You don't talk about a lot of females. The next person I got is Leon Silvers.
Sheldon, that was a great. I like that, man. That was much respect for that one because you're right. I forgot actually about what she'd done. I mean, she did a track on the early 90s called "Treat You Right" again, which got a lot of plays. So on one of the solo albums for Elektra. It's a big record.
And then she gave Stephanie Mills some of her biggest records in the 80s. So very, very big, very big. And the next person I got is Leon Silvers. And people who don't know who Leon Silvers is, Leon Silvers he came out of a family group like the Jacksons. It was the Silvers, and then he was the main producer guy with them in the 70s. And then when he went into the 80s, he was the main producer for Dick Griffey's Solar Records. So all you got to do is if you listen to any of the records that came out on Solar,
and the beat goes on by the Whispers,
the second time around, the Shalimar, Lakeside, all of that.
The Blackstreet's debut album.
And as a matter of fact, he was so talented is that he was like a one-man band, even though within the whole Solar situation, they had other musicians who were playing on each other's records. He was the main producer. He wrote songs, and he had a slick production style. But he was able to also, the way he wrote as a songwriter, along with his productions, he had a percussive songwriting style that was so distinctive that when Teddy Riley was making Remember the Time, he had Bernard Bell say, I need you to go ahead and write the way Leon Silvers would. It was more like a percussive. And the best example I can give you is that Blackstreet song, Giving You All My Lovin'. That's a perfect example that's Leon Silvers. Also the Big Bub song, Everybody. If you listen to those two records, you hear the Leon Silvers sound in terms of the backgrounds and the drums and the songwriting. The next person I got is Rick James. In the 80s, there's Rick James. We talk about before Prince.
Rick James, bitch.
That's right. Rick James it was almost like when you look in terms of when Guy was out, right? And then you had it was kind of the same way. Guy was doing their thing, but they were kind of caught in the middle of the old groups and the newer groups in between. And they kind of like were stuck in that pocket, even though they were very influential. It was like the other artists behind them took the baton and ran with it. Rick James, man, was crazy in terms of he had a very animated sound, very distinctive sound, recognizable sound, the way he produced. The band was part of the music. And not only that, is that this guy is not only writing hits for himself, he's writing hits for the Mary Jane Girls. He's writing hits for the Temptations. This guy is crazy. He's doing simultaneously, all at the same time. So as a producer, and also what he did was he took that whole P-Funk sound and he kind of like made it slicker, introduced a lot of rock elements. He could do rock, he could do jazz, he could do ballads from a production style or whatever. Of course, his persona People kind of look at the persona, and they don't sometimes they don't look at the music, the body of music that he created. The next group, my number one is Neptunes, and I'll put Neptune / Timbaland. You know, Neptunes were very good. They had a distinctive sound. Timbaland had a distinctive sound. But one of the things that the Neptunes did, even though they had good drum sounds, their songs, and I don't know if it was because of the era, but a lot of the songs that they had were most of the big hits were based off. They were kind of like almost updates of records that was out. So when they were doing, but you got to look at creeping into like the 2000s or whatever. So I got to kind of stay away from that.
Yeah.
But when you saw them at peak in the 90s, obviously when they start going into the 2000s, you start seeing them kind of like make records that were in the vein. They were kind of copying records. But I would say they were interchangeable because of the unique sound that they had. And my favorite is the 90s sound, like Use Your Heart, those type of records like that.
Okay.
Them Teddy Riley, you know, that era. I like them better before they got to the 2000s when they got really big. Timbaland,
okay,
you know, the sound that he had, it really made people like kind of wake up. And he was another guy that kind of like redirected the attention from what Teddy was doing. So, and if anybody who hasn't read his book, you got to read his book. Very interesting book in terms of, he talks about a lot of stories, how he escaped from that swing mob situation. But when you look at Timbaland, he ate. He I won't say it. I'm gonna say what we can talk about it offline. But you know, but his sound was like, it was the next thing. So New Jack Swing was kind of like it phased out, and the hip hop soul thing was really in. But Timbaland was kind of like, when the hip hop soul was doing what it was doing with the samples and all of that, Timbaland was kind of really doing his thing with the beats. You know, shout out to their bridges were always the best. Shout out to you. You know, my favorite era, like I said, of those guys was in the 90s. Okay, and then my last one is R. Kelly. R. Kelly, people wonder how he should be rated higher.
Well, that's high enough. I mean,
the only reason why I didn't rate it, and people, you know, when you look in terms of his style, I call his style very deceptive, because his style was very simple in terms of the music, because he had the same tempo drums, he had a guitar player, he had, you know, guys that were working with him on the arrangement side, you know, but he had he was a master of simplicity. He had catchy hits, and he had a flair for writing and creating, like, you know, he could do his thing, but then he could write and create songs that were very dramatic. Like what's the one female singer that he had produced in the like the late 90s?
Are you talking about Sparkle?
Sparkle.
Yeah.
Perfect example. That's the one. He could write dramatic records. He was great with Changing Faces. So he had a very distinctive sound. It was very simplistic, but it was very catchy. Obviously, you know, when you are a writer, producer, and you're an artist at the same time, the content that he has, it kind of it's almost like when you look at like the Rick James situation, is that when you're doing the records for yourself, we're seeing the whole R. Kelly experience. So it kind of amplifies the talent as much as it amplifies it more than him producing other artists. You know, Changing Faces and all those folks were great, but as a songwriter and producer in that 90s window, to come out under the shadow of Aaron Hall and then find a niche with what he was doing, that was kind of crazy. You know, he was the one that went across the line on the whole sexuality aspect of 12 Play. And those records, I really didn't care for that album too much, but everybody loved that album. It was like, I bought the cassette one time, and I played it. I left it on the table for anybody to take it, you know, and then I gradually I went back to the ballads. He wasn't, to me, good. His when he was doing ballads, that was his strength. Up tempo's kind of okay, but I think that pocket between the 80s and 90s, with the 90s, to me, that's my favorite. When you look at the R. Kelly album, If I Can't Sleep, all those records like that, very, very good. Very romantic, very emotional, very dramatic. He can do the I believe I can fly. His diversity was great. So
One man can make one woman hate all men.
Wow.
Yeah. He had a good he had a good twist. He had an eccentric way of writing. It was very eccentric, but it was great. It was great.
Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, okay. So that's so we've gone from 20 up to 6. So Stevie, just before you do your top 5, do you want to go slowly from 20 up to 6 so people who are just joining can hear
do
you?
that.
Yeah, just go through and then
just one more comment on the Angela Wimbush inclusion there, which just threw me for a loop. Did you listen to Sheena Easton's album, The Lover in You, from the early 90s?
Yes.
There's a track on that called Fire and Rain, a ballad. It's one of my favourite ballads from the early 90s, written and produced by Angela Wimbush. Go back to that record, Sheldon. Seriously, it's like one of the most underrated Sheena Easton records of all time, that.
I gotta check that out. I never heard that one.
Sheena Easton, because she was a pop artist from Scotland. But listen, we'll talk about it with Ellie and Beck, but listen to the Lover in You album. It's just a great pop R&B swing album. Right, anyway, from number 20.
Yeah.
I got Jermaine Dupri was right at the bottom. Jermaine Dupri, 19, Kyle Hudnall, 18, Timmy Gatlin, 17, Deela Vance. What was that? Yeah, 2019, 8, 16, Wolf and Epic. 15, Foster McElroy. 14, Chucky Booker. 13, Devontae Swing. 12, George G-Man Carranti. 11, R. Kelly. 10, Full Force. 9, Vassell Benford. 8, The Characters. 7, Jam & Lewis. And 6, Dallas Austin. That was it, yeah.
Okay, so who's number 5? Who's your top 5?
I'm cheating here again because I had one name and then another name sprung to me that I'd left out, and I thought, I can't do it. I can't. So it's in a tie. These two are in a tie. I'm sorry for cheating, but we did mention Timmy Gatlin earlier, but he worked with a guy called, obviously, Alton Wookie Stewart. But I'm going to throw another name in there because they worked together a lot. Alton Wookie Stewart worked with Fred MacFarlane on a lot of New Jack records, like Keith Jackson.
As a matter of fact, he was on the Keith Sweat record. I think it was Don't Stop Your Love. Fred MacFarlane was on the Keith Sweat Make It Last Forever album.
All right, I've tied them two in with can't leave this person out in terms of New Jack Swing and R&B balladry from the 90s. Gerald Levert. We just cannot leave Gerald Levert out. Imagine if we not mentioned him.
Is he not with?
We might have to cancel the podcast if we don't mention him. You know what I mean?
No, but he didn't produce. He didn't produce it alone, though. Who was his partner?
It was Travell Productions.
Well, this is what it was. And initially, when he had in the 80s, it was him and Mark Nicholas. What's his name? Mark.
Oh goodness. I'm gonna have to look at. I've interviewed him too because that is. Mark Gordon.
Mark Gordon.
So he did all the stuff with Troop and Mamacita and
right. But the same thing. But when you look in terms of what Gerald Levert was able to do, Gerald Levert was writing and producing for people like Mickey Howard. You're talking about a young person. He's producing records for Mickey Howard. He was doing records he was giving us some of her big records, some of her popular records. He just did a lot of people, man. And when you look in terms of in the 90s, he brought Barry White back. He was when I say behind the scenes, he was very prolific in being able to produce. It's like he wasn't like the flashy because he was doing traditional music. Like Stevie said, is that we got to go ahead and mention him because between that period, I want to say his first record comes out in 84. Yes, sir. First record comes out in 84. And you're talking about from about 8, he had a good run as far as producing, whether he was with his group or with his partner, Mark. and then he was producing with another guy named Nicholas. I forgot his name. He's on the CD. His partner. After him and Mark kind of split up, Tony Nicholas, I think is what his name. Yeah. They produced a lot of records.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so Gerald Levert, you got to give him a lot of credit.
That's just come out, a 3 CD anthology with there was an unreleased New Jack Swing remix of I Wanna Be Bad on here for the first time on CD. It's an incredible remix. So get this while it's on soulmusic.com. Highly recommended.
Yeah, I got to get that.
Brilliant box set.
Yeah, got to get that.
Right, next.
Yeah, that's a good one, man, that you brought up.
Yeah. We like I say, would have lost a whole lot of credibility if we wouldn't have mentioned his name.
You're tough. Okay.
Oh, you enough.
But then again, like I say, my top 20 is based strictly on New Jack Swing producers, and the likes of Chucky Thompson, great producer, as Colin Mills mentioned, didn't make it, but as a mid-90s R&B producer, he's one of the best, Chucky Thompson. Right, next up at number four, LA and Babyface.
Okay.
You know, I mean, Sheldon could talk all night about LA and Babyface. But we all know about what they did. We don't need to spend half an hour on LA and Babyface, do it? Maybe a few records you might not know, like the Sheena Easton stuff, but we could sit here all night and talk about Bobby Brown and The Deal and whatever. But anyway, let's move on. Number 3, The Untouchables, which includes Eddie F, Novell Hodge, Dave Jam Hall, and whoever else was in the Untouchables. I just think they
Kenny
made
Smooth, Kenny Smooth
at the time. You know, Jasmine Guy. There's just loads. Number 2, I had Kyle West.
Wow.
Yeah, I'd rate him in terms of New Jack Swing. I just rate him so highly.
Did you enjoy his interview? He had 2 interviews.
Do I think he's better than Teddy? He said Teddy influenced him, but I sometimes think, do I prefer Kyle West's production to Teddy's production? That's up for debate, but Kyle West, I just rate him so highly. He's just he's a New Jack Swing producer. And then number 1, you know, I mean, we know what our number 1's going to be for you and for me and Nnamdi anyway. We know what that's going to be. So I don't even need to say his name. Next one.
Is that Mucho?
What?
Mucho?
Well, it's not Devontae Swing, is it?
Okay.
I'll save that for you. I'll save it. You want to do half an hour podcast on his name again.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna recount my top 15 before I go to my top 5. So I had Foster McClory at in number 20. David Foster, I had him at number 19. Great balladeer. I had the Neptunes.
Who is that again?
David Foster.
Oh my god. Oh.
I had Mr. Stanley Brown.
Give me the sleeping pills now, please.
I had Stanley Brown. You know, he did the "I'm Dreaming" by Christopher Williams. "Express Yourself." He did Drew Hill. So Stanley Brown. Then I had Timmy Gatlin and Wokey Stewart for all the work he did with the Guy debut album, the Christopher Williams and BBD and stuff. Then I had number 14 was Devontae Swing, or 15 was Devontae Swing. Then I had Brian Alexander Morgan, Kyle West and I'll Be Sure, R. Kelly, DJ Eddie F and the Untouchables. Then in my top 10, it was Diddy, Puff Daddy. I had Timbaland, I had Jermaine Dupri, Rodney Jerkins, and Dallas Austin at number 11. Going to my top 5, and I had to go with Dr. Dre because he changed music from the West Coast.
I don't see you as a person sat there listening to Dr. Dre productions.
You know what?
Believe it.
Yeah, no, I you know what?
Believe it, Nnamdi. You're telling me you sit there listening to his G-Funk album.
The Chronic was everybody had the Chronic was
course,
just.
But did you?
I have the Chronic.
Do you have the NWA album?
Well, yeah,
I'm roasting
not only NWA, but we talked about JJ Fad as well, and then Easy Does It.
Yeah,
And then
Dr. Dre,
yeah, and
he's
then
good. He
before
hit it.
the music was influenced by a lot of James Brown on the East Coast. He brought up all the Parliaments and stuff, and really, he influenced the Blackstreet album because the whole West Coast where he was bringing out all these stylistics and bringing all those tracks and stuff. Everyone just said, we couldn't compete because he made it. Yeah, so Dre, and yeah, forget about Eminem and 50 Cent and Eve and all the stuff he did afterwards. But I'm just saying that when he just, we talked about 80s, he was big. He started to do stuff in the 80s and 90s. So I've had to give it to Dre. You guys would probably be surprised that I had my number 4.
Wow, here we go.
Is Teddy Riley.
No, stop it.
I'm
No.
serious. Now, of course, Teddy is.
Good night, viewers. Good night. That is it. Good night. I don't believe this.
And it's not because I'm upset that he still hasn't agreed to interview with me. But when I think about
it is. It's got to be. It is.
My all-time favorite producer. But when I think of, he is my all-time favorite producer and everything. But I think about when I try to be as objective as possible. I thought about.
No. Forget that. What albums do you play the most, Nnamdi? You play.
Make It Last Forever.
Every week on this podcast, right? You play the Bobby album.
The Bobby album.
The Sweat album. You play the Gap. These are all albums that you play all the time, and you put them in number 4. No.
Yeah. I think when I was put in the top 5, I thought about. I just thought about just. If I had to be as objective as possible, and as much as Teddy's anything Teddy does, I buy. But I had to put him I put number 3, LA and Babyface, because questions I normally ask people: who do they prefer, Babyface on his own or LA and Babyface? And if you think about how much Babyface changed music and influenced music, he's just bubblegum type of music, and then his ballads and his writing, it was just effortless with Face. It just. Teddy's my favorite, but think about what LA and Babyface did.
Teddy Riley, if you're watching, I got you. Nnamdi didn't. I got you, my number 1. And this man here.
Colin, he says it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense, and I look at it and I think, wow. But this was
God
one of the
damn, this got to be the most dumbass thing I ever heard on this podcast, man.
And any guest I talk to, I tell them Teddy's my favorite, everything. But I almost when I had to just be Colin's right. I had to keep it real, but just thinking about wow, as much as I love Teddy, but LA and Babyface. Then and number 3, LA and Babyface were number 3. Then number 2 was Jam and Lewis. I think.
Wow, you put Jam and Lewis ahead of Teddy. Nah, man.
And the reason is
why? Tell me your most listened to Jam and Lewis records. Then
On Bending Knees.
All the time.
On Bending Knees. It's one of the tracks that Finest. You just think about all the stuff with Alexander O'Neal. To think about Optimistic. The fact that they can then do stuff with Mary, do stuff with Mariah, and they don't sound the same. It's like it doesn't make sense because you listen to it, you think, "Oh, is that Jam and Lewis?" It's the way that they've been, since the 80s, and I think about since the early 80s. Forget all the Jan. People talk about the Jan, but it's all the stuff that they did with what was the name of Avery, his label. We had SOS Band.
Taboo.
Oh, Taboo.
Yeah,
Taboo.
Yeah, Taboo. So all the stuff they were doing with Taboo. I mean, think about all the stuff they did with Alexander O'Neal. And that's the thing that then the Heartbreak album, the album that really made New Edition, really made them household names. Then they did the stuff with Ralph and it's just the ballads.
It's an incredible back catalogue.
Yeah, and the thing is, they still make music now, but they don't sound the same. You won't listen to their stuff and think, "Oh yeah, that's Jam and Lewis." It's hard to tell them apart. If I hear Teddy, I know it's Teddy, and if I hear a Babyface, He
I
said,
think in the early night, from about 90, 91, 92, they got very clever. They got hold of Low Key, didn't they? And Low Key started doing productions for him.
yeah, mint condition. They got
Sounds of
Stokey to
Blackness
help.
and,
Yeah,
you know, so that helped them evolve their sound. I felt at the time, Professor
yeah.
T, you know, they realized they had to. That was Jam and Lewis moving with the times, really. I think.
Yeah, and you know when Perspective didn't really, you know, I've heard him in talk about his when they had their own label, and A&M didn't really support them, and they had to close it. They just focused on producing and stuff, and so as I said, as Teddy's my favorite, but I had to give them all respect for what they do. Terry Lewis, the main songwriter, and Jimmy is just amazing with the keys. Teddy posted a video on his Instagram of Jimmy Jam showing how he produced the was it What Have You Done For Me Lately by Janet. Just by he just mastered with the keys. And every producer I interviewed, they always would put Jam and Lewis up there and stuff. Even even Cal West talked about meeting Jam and Lewis at Jimmy Jam. And
I
then
mean, in terms of like full Jam and Lewis production albums, which would you rate higher? The Alexander O'Neal album, Hearsay, or New Edition's Any Heartbreak?
I think
both within a year, about a year.
Hearsay for me, it would be Hearsay.
It's a great album.
Hearsay was great song for song. Obviously, it's different because it's a group. Obviously, Ralph is singing a lot, but I think Hearsay, as far as song for song, and the reason why I say that is that album split up between up tempos and ballads. I'm sorry.
Do you think Jam and Lewis ever bettered the Hearsay album in terms of their sound?
I'll say that because they're writing
that for me is essentially their
I would say and that is I would give them that, because when you look in terms of the strong songwriting, song for song, because when you're listening to like the Janet Jackson records, they're giving you different styles. It's still great production. They're giving you styles, but if you're talking about just straight songwriting and production, and between that and the SOS Band, but I would give Alexander O'Neal Hearsay probably that would be the number one.
Well, there we go. I would say the best three albums Jam and Lewis produced was Hearsay, the Any Heartbreak album, and the Janet Jackson 1814 album. Them three albums, you know, I can pretty much listen to from start to finish. Give one or two tracks, but overall,
for me,
great albums.
For me, I could do the albums I would do. Hearsay would be number one. I would say, Hearsay would be number one. The Alexander O'Neal first album is number two. Janet Jackson Control is number three. If I had to package up SOS Band's greatest hits, that would be four, because great. And then 1814 is really dope because they're giving you a variety of styles. And then of course I would throw in, if I had an honorable mention, Any Heartbreak. And for me, another thing too is I wish that Ralph was able to kind of, I think, you know how like LA and Babyface were Bobby Brown's muse, even though Teddy Riley did great records for him. Between both of them, Ralph, I think Jam and Lewis brought out the best in Ralph Tresvant. And I think that it would have been great for him to be in the space to do consecutive albums with them, to really bring out what he could do, because the records they produced on him on that first and that second album, they were great, man.
Yeah. Do you know what? Really great. I feel like, Sheldon, we're justifying Nnamdi's number two here, because he's not justifying it. He ain't telling me. He ain't telling me he sits down and listens to Janet Jackson at his all-time, and he's his all-time favorite. You know, Alexander. We're trying to justify this for you because you're not putting that across to us.
No. As I said, everyone knows, even Teddy knows that he's my favorite producer. Every album I could go, if I had to do Mastermind, I would just do I'll do Teddy Riley. Yeah. However, when I was putting this together, I couldn't. I had to just think about, as much as I love Teddy, I had to respect Jam and Lewis, and I had to respect LA and Babyface for what they've done. Teddy created a whole sound, changed the industry, changed the game, but Jam and Lewis have just been so consistent from the 80s,
But I
90s.
feel like your top 20 is based upon what everybody else would put in as their top 20.
No,
I feel
no,
like you're
that's
saying you try to remain impartial and put the perfect top 20 up there. Which, why not? Why not? You know what I mean?
no,
Someone's got to do it.
I mean, the people. I mean, somebody's mentioned. Somebody mentioned. Organized noise, and I thought, yeah, you know what? When you think about what they did, not just with
I wasn't a
Outkast.
great fan, but I'll be honest though, you could put them in. They could be in your top 20 as an overall fans' social media view that they should be in there. But let's get real. Did you actually like their sound? I wasn't a great fan of their sound. To be,
Yeah,
but
they had a few hits and hit.
and other people will say, "Oh, it needs to be in the top 20."
Yeah,
No, if you didn't like the sound, you didn't like the sound.
yeah, and guys, this was independent. So all of you guys, it's great if you were to put down your top 20, who would make your top 20? Because as you notice, Stevie, Sheldon, and I quite different. We had a few that overlaps. I mean, the fact that I couldn't put my favorite producer at number one, and I actually hadn't even got to number one. My number one. My number one is what concert? I'm on holiday in Cyprus. I need to get back to that. Call it. As I said, Teddy is still king of everything. And
What
stuff.
you're saying? Teddy Riley's my favorite producer all time. But
Yeah, but
is it number 4?
but yeah, but
view is it number 4?
As I said, I know, Mike, it sounds silly and stuff, but as I said, number one, and I haven't even got to my number one is Quincy, and I was ranking them as in Quincy, and you might just think, okay, what has he done? And I'm thinking, okay, yes, he did.
I'm not interested in what he's done, Nnamdi. I mean, I'm interested in what you actually listen to by him.
Of course, the Thriller and the Bad album, and of course the Q Joint album. I loved I love just the fact that he's the Godfather. So as I said, from a generation, especially from the 80s, everyone looked at what he did and how he just put things together and stuff. Secret Garden was one, but one of my favorite songs ever is Tamir's "You Put a Move on My Heart," which was a sort of a remake of "Lady in My Life," which is my all-time favorite song. But that is Rod Temperton writing the track, Quincy producing it, and Tamir, who has a voice of an angel, singing and delivering an amazing track. But maybe this is misleading because I said ranking our all-time favorite, and I probably was thinking the sort of the creme de creme of producers. And if I reread the question that we put out there, I would have put Teddy first. I probably would have put Jam and Lewis and stuff. But I just thought about greatest producers, and I just had to put Quincy as number one, Jam and Lewis, LA and Babyface, Teddy Riley, and who rounded it up, and Dr. Dre, just because I just think that those are the top 5 best producers out there.
It feels like a Grammy Award winning top 5. That's what it feels like. It's looked at the Grammys and thought, right, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Well, it'll be interesting to see who makes Sheldon's top 5 because.
Okay, so I'm just gonna go ahead and go back with mine. Starting from 20 on up, I had Devontae Swing, I had Jermaine Dupri, Basil Bedford, I had Freeze and Spider-Man, but I'm gonna move them out, and I'm gonna slide in. You probably know who this person is, Steve. Nick Martinelli. He's the guy that was behind all the loose ends records.
This guy is putting stuff he listens. I can tell. He's putting the stuff he listens to. It's still from back then to now. Because he calls out Nick Martinelli. That tells me that.
Yeah, Nick Martinelli. in terms of that whole loose ends going into the 80s and all that.
I
He
know
was real
Chairman
good.
Lewis
I
went
mean,
too pleased. They insinuate
808.
that they ripped their music. That they ripped up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but they said it. I mean, Carl McIntyre said it. He said, yeah, we heard what was going on, and we actually did it. So Nick Martinelli was good even with the balladry, and he produced people like Stephanie Mills, so he was great. So I had to move him. I had to take out Freezing Spider-Man, so I'm sorry, guys. I put Nick Martinelli in there, okay? Then I got Dallas Austin, Chucky Booker, Timmy Gatlin, and Wookie. Then it's Kashif. Then it's Angela Wimbush, Leon Silvers, Rick James, Neptune / Timbaland and R. Kelly. And then my 5. Okay, number 5 for me is I'll give you P. Diddy and the Hitman. And the reason why I picked them is because when you look in terms of impact, people it could take a lot of shots at them in terms of Puffy's production style, or was he really producing? But one of the things that he brought back, I don't know, you guess it. I did say Kashif.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he was.
I don't know, you guess it. I did say Kashif. Yeah. So, Kashif was one of my main guys. But with Puffy, Hitman, what they did for R&B music, for contemporary R&B music, is that one, they brought the dance element back into R&B, because before, I mean, rap was really taking over, and rap was influencing, or became a dominant music, so to speak. For a lot of, especially like male listeners, because R&B at a certain point, it was to the point where a lot of males were getting turned off. It was because they were more into rap music. But Puff brought the celebratory, dance-oriented music that, like people who listened to disco many years ago and they like to go out to the clubs. Puffy and the Hitmen brought that energy back. Obviously, you got to give a lot of credit to a lot of the records that they sample, but they brought that energetic, celebratory feel of R&B dance music that was kind of like lost. We had the break beats and the sampling and the hip hop and R&B that they were doing. They picked up, but it was almost like they kind of took it to the next level and brought back a perspective or dimension of R&B that was kind of missing in terms of that celebratory club type of energy. Then after him, I'm going to go ahead and go with Teddy Riley.
Oof.
Teddy Riley is number 4. Teddy Riley is my all-time favorite producer. Obviously, I said for a variety of reasons.
Hold on. Rewind. What did you just say there? What was the line you just said there? Teddy Riley's my all-time favorite producer.
He's my all-time favorite, but the thing about it is that
what's going on here?
But I'm giving you a criteria. Yeah. Teddy's my all-time favorite. Teddy's my all-time favorite, and it goes to say, why? Obviously, I've always been into music, but as a young person doing music, he has a special spot in my heart in terms of his output, everything that he did. Even though I aspired to be a producer, but I wasn't technically oriented, I could at least imagine I could be a producer listening to Teddy Riley. So great. He's my all-time favorite. Now, ahead of him, I'm going to give you LA and Babyface. All right. Ahead of Teddy, I give LA and Babyface because, again, they're the breadth of music that they could do, because they could do up tempos, they could do mid tempos, they can do ballads, and obviously the songs speak for themselves, and they could do this with any type of artist. So you imagine they brought the Whispers back, gave them the biggest hit of their career, and then they could turn around and do a Bobby Brown, and then turn around and introduce new female artists like a Karen White, and it's just the diversity of their songwriting, So no matter if it was up-tempo ballads, the songwriting and the production, it never sacrificed. The songwriting didn't go away. So it just was that they wrote for artists, and even though their sound was very distinct, whoever they wrote for, they wrote it in no manner to when those artists perform those songs. It's not like when you look at R. Kelly records, you can hear somebody sing a record produced by R. Kelly, and then you're thinking automatically R. Kelly. But if you listen to Karen White, You listen to Bobby Brown, you listen to the Whispers, you listen to whoever they produce, TLC. It's a thing where those artists are at the forefront, but it's a testament to the material that LA and Babyface they wrote. Okay, right above them, I'm gonna go ahead and go with Jam and Lewis. Okay.
So that's number 2.
Jam and
Is that
Lewis.
your number 2 now?
Yeah.
Jam and Lewis is my number 3.
Number 3.
Number 3. Jam and Lewis number 3. Okay, Jam and Lewis.
Hold on a minute. You've got LA and Babyface at what, number 4? You just said Teddy Riley was at number 4.
Teddy Riley, LA and Babyface. Well, I had P. Diddy, Teddy Riley, LA and Babyface. Now, oh man, I'm
yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna stay with it. So I'm gonna stay with it. Jam and Lewis, they're my number 2.
And
because with the breadth of their music, is with the it's very the production. Even though when I hear the records, I always think about them. It's them no matter who they're producing. But they made the production made those records very interesting. The songs were great, and the thing I loved about them is that they could write a song, and some of their songs had like it was a single title. It wasn't multiple words. It was like they were able to do that. Optimistic, sensitivity, and the titles almost they were like jazz records. Like jazz records were instrumental records, and they would have a title, and the title would match the feel of the record. And for me, when you look at Hearsay, Criticize, Fake, they were very good at the title stuck out, but then the music reflected the titles, and no matter who they were producing, they gave their artists personality. SOS Band, of course, Janet, them being able to, Alexander O'Neal and Janet Jackson were their 2 muses for me, because Janet Jackson, they could do a whole bunch of different styles on 1814 or Control, just being able to just give her a whole palette of music was just really, really great. Instead of just giving them, one type of style, one type of sound, very diverse. And when you look at Jam and Lewis, before Teddy Riley, the time when they were big with Janet Jackson, they were supposed to come out like with a record of their own with their whole production camp, songwriting camp. They had great background vocals, background singer Lisa Keith. They had a guy Randy. They had a crew like the GR crew, and it was a big deal that they were supposed to come out with their own group called The Secret. Jam and Lewis. This is back in '85, but they never came out with the group. But that's why they're my number 2 in terms of the diversity of the sound, the songwriting, the personality that they gave their artists. And of course, my number 1.
Oh, hold on a minute. Let's get a drum logo, because is this going to be a shocker, or is it going to here we go?
Nah, it's not going to be a shocker. I'm going to give it to Quincy Jones. The reason why I say Quincy Jones is my number 1 is that Quincy Jones kind of switched up R&B. Of course, we know him for the Michael Jackson sound, but before he was doing that sound with Michael Jackson, he was doing that sound with like other people. And he brought jazz. He brought like a jazzy overtone. He blended jazz with dance music. Okay. So when you look at the records that we hear Michael Jackson doing, he was doing those records with the Brothers Johnson. And then I got to get honorable mention, 78, 79 was a hot window when he started to kind of bring that stuff together like that. But another reason why it makes him my number 1 is that he brought the traditional production value into contemporary music. So that means that he's big on songcraft, because we think about producers now, they beats and all that stuff like that. But he's big on song arrangement. He's big on vocal presentation. He's big on the whole, the record, the whole, the process, like a project manager. So when you look at everything that he's doing, he's pulling great songwriters, great musicians, all these different type of things to create a sound. And obviously it's culminated with the Michael Jackson stuff. But once you start looking at Q's Juke Joint, Back on the Block, The Dude, those albums that his albums, that's where you see his genius come about, being able to go ahead and identify unknown vocalists like a Tamia, and take established people and put them in and mix them all together and just create James Ingram. You know, you're talking about bringing in just great voices, and then Michael Jackson, you know, being able to do what he did with Michael Jackson. Because people, you know, it's sacrilegious to talk about Michael Jackson, because sometimes people think that Michael Jackson is the genius behind all those records. But without Quincy, and Michael Jackson wanted him. They wanted Maurice White from Earth, Wind and Fire to work with Michael Jackson, but Michael wanted Quincy. So I think Quincy was a great bridge, taking the old and new, but also he knew when, okay, this is my sound, this is my style. And he also knew when to say pass the baton and give it to Teddy. A couple guys, Colin Mills, old school flavor. They talked about James Brown and Bernard Bell. Bernard Bell did some great records with Glenn Jones. The ballads he had, the piano chords, all of that. He's a great producer. I just feel that he would be
in the DR Productions camp for me. If I'm putting Teddy Riley at number one, that includes Dave. Yeah, includes Bernard Bell.
Yeah,
that includes Zan. All them people that worked.
Exactly. So you gotta give them guys credit. But then he moved into gospel, so he kind of like left the R&B alone. But a lot of records that he produced, that he had a hand in writing, and you know, we know that there are always other people behind the scenes. The High Five record, Kissing Game, and a lot of those records. Let's Chill. You got to go ahead and shout them out. Of course, yeah. Who produced James Brown, because he would need to get a mention. But James Brown kind of like did his own thing. You know, he had people working with him, but we can't put him. We can put him in the 80s and 90s because his music was sampled. But as an artist, James Brown's pocket is, you know, 3 generations prior, 50s, 60s, and 70s. But shout out to James Brown. But I got one more honorable mention. Brian Alexander Morgan. He's an honorable mention because even if he never made in another record after It's About Time, the songcraft on that album, that's probably maybe one of the top 5 albums of the 90s. That's got to be in an all-time top 5 in terms of the songs, the melody. Those are some great records, man.
Yeah.
let me play devil's advocate here, and I want to pull to task P. Diddy.
Yeah.
Now you hear this phrase, the death of R&B. You hear the head honcho at Death Row standing up at a platform saying, if you don't want your label head to rap on your record, come and sign for us. Now let's take the late 90s. I'm hearing a lot of club records produced that said by P. Diddy and the Hitmakers. And all they seemed to do was sample records that I'd heard a million times before from the 80s. DeBarge, M2 May. Now, I would argue that was the start of the death of R&B, because R&B after that just seemed to, it was like a snake eating its tail.
Well, what happened
how many times, for example, did we hear, Juicy Fruit on an R&B record after P. Diddy had sampled it?
Well, think about it. Is that Teddy Riley and but think about it. Is that Teddy Riley and Markel Riley? They sampled Juicy for Rex and Effect back in '89.
Got it, but again,
they made a record called
P. Diddy
Juicy.
Came along mid to late '90s, a snake eating its tail. Here we're having it again. We're having it again here. And all P. Diddy used to do with those club records was just sample some record that we'd know. And after that, it just spawned a whole. And for me, this is where R&B was dying. It was the snake eating its tail. It's getting smaller and smaller and smaller because I'm bored now. But by the time the 2000s come along, I'm like, I'm bored.
Yeah.
But you know what it is? And I kind of agree with you to a certain degree, because we all have a moment where we kind of like checked out on music. We have a period where we checked out.
2000s.
But you got to look at even with Teddy Riley's productions, okay, Teddy Riley didn't necessarily. A lot of his records before I even understood what sampling was. 90% of his catalog, there's a lot of samples in there.
Mm-hmm.
Or if he's not sampling, he's replaying.
He was a terrible rapper.
No, but hold on, but what Teddy Riley is doing, Teddy Riley is replaying. He's replaying records that were out before, because what he's doing is he's replicating the way a lot of rappers used to do before they ever made records. They used to do rhyme routines off the songs off of the radio, and that influenced his production style. So if you listen to a lot of records, you know, Girl, I talked about that. That's like a flip side of Carrie Lucas's Show Me Where You Coming From. You know, he's got a lot of records like that. So you know what happens,
about James Brown.
But what happens is
he had a lot of James Brown drum sounds in his records.
Right, there's a lot, but also the melodies of songs, they're coming from other records. So what happens is he kind of ushers in. Now, keep in mind that before him, artists would use each other's drum riffs and horn sounds and all of that. But Teddy Riley is the start of producers channeling the past, whether you're sampling, you're looping, you're replaying. He's really the start of that. Mm-hmm. But what happens is that Teddy is a musician, and Puff Daddy was not necessarily a musician. But when you look at the people that he had with him, he was like a filter. But even with Puffy, because he wasn't a musician, he understood records. But somebody would ship as an interview. We need to go ahead and get this guy, because this guy was in the 90s. He was running Bad Boy with Puffy. His name was oh my God, I can't think of his name, but Kirk Burroughs. And he talks about how he used to give Puffy cassettes of classic R&B stuff, and Puffy would take the cassette, and then he would turn them in. He'd take those songs and turn them into records. But the reason why I rate them so high is that what they did was R&B, up-tempo R&B. I won't say ballads, but up-tempo R&B was kind of like falling to the wayside because rap music had kind of went to the forefront. So the style, the approach they did to records, they sampled the records. In the beginning, I was like, okay, yeah, you're doing it too much. But I was on the plane one day. I was flying in, and I heard like 4 or 5 records back to back, and I was like, oh, I was hooked then. And I think the feel, yeah, he sampled the record and all of that as a producer, and it's a lot of people. We can put Jermaine Dupri in the mix. We can put a lot of folks in the mix to say, okay, did they really do these records? Are they really a producer? Do they have help? Whoever it may be. But I just say that what they did, the feel of those, it just brought that celebratory feeling. And part of that is, yeah, you're taking bits and pieces of old records, and you're sampling a whole, you know, the Police and all of that. So I understand, because there's a moment in time where I kind of check out to kind of right around like the early 2000s, because now the people who are coming out in the early 2000s, these people have grown up with rap music, but they're growing up with the production styles of the previous 5 years. So that's how they're making records. So think of,
by the time Ashanti dropped in the early 2000s, and I'm watching people going crazy over Ashanti.
Yeah, I didn't like that.
I've heard all this before, and vocally, was she all that? Again, playing devil's advocate here. Was she really all that?
But see, there you go. But think about it. Look how old we are. So at that point, at a certain point, the longer we listen to music, it's going to be a time where, and I love Foolish. You know, I love the records that she did with Ja Rule. But if you ask somebody that's probably like 35 years and old or younger, they're gonna look to that. Like a lot of people look at Brandy, like Brandy, they call her the voice. But people of a certain age are like, I don't think so. So it's just, you know, a lot of it is taste, and like you say, playing devil's advocate. But you know, the death of R&B, you ask somebody of a certain age, they say, hey, the death of R&B was, you know, maybe after 87. So when Teddy Riley came in, they could say, hey, that was the death of R&B.
Listen, we're getting lots of comments about Prince here.
Yeah,
Prince was my when you, but Steve, when you got me, I had 5, I had 6, but it was like 5. So I had to take Prince out. Prince, yeah.
When people they're going about Prince now, but during the 80s and 90s, I'm sorry, Prince was the property of pop music and rock.
Yes,
he wasn't associated with black music, even though he's a black musician. All his records, they were celebrated more by pop and rock people. Well, now he's gone. Black music is celebrating Prince. Too late.
Well, I'm gonna tell you like this. Here in America, man, black people love Prince, man. The argument was always who's bigger, Prince or Michael Jackson, and there are people who are like Prince fanatics. People love the B-sides, they loved all of that. It was just that Prince was like that, and I had him on my list, but I think I made a mistake.
You don't associate Prince with R&B, though. I'm sorry, you don't.
You know what?
But here's the thing, though.
Even though he did a lot of R&B.
Hold on, let me finish this real quick. Let me jump in real quick. Prince, when you look at R&B encapsulates everything. Now, when you look at Prince's approach to music, his approach to music is not an 80s approach. His approach to music is a 70s approach because one, he grows up in Minneapolis, where there aren't a lot of black radio stations. So he's a big James Brown. You can look at Prince, you can see the music, you can see the James. So he is black music. It's all because you see the James Brown aspect of it, you see the Parliament Funk, you see the 70s aspect of it. But what it is in the 80s, his music is so broad and diverse that where you're hearing different ingredients from other musical genres, but it's still within the framework of black music in terms of its presentation, other influences in the music. But what it is that we look at black music is, when it got to the 80s, it's a thing where black music went into this commercial space because of the industries. So the whole creativity and everything that we see with Prince, that used to happen in black music in the 70s. Stevie Wonder is a perfect example of that. But it's just the fact that black music had changed to where it was now more of a pop aspect of it. But is that certain things you have a point, because with a lot of music that Prince was doing, it didn't sound like it was synonymous with black music, because black music had heavy drums and heavy bass lines, and Prince's music, he didn't have bass. He had a lot of his songs, 1999, those songs didn't have, at a time when black records had heavy bass lines and heavy rhythm sections, Prince's records didn't have that. He had the Lynn drums and all that stuff like that. So I see where you're going with it.
Listen, when I'm in black music record shops, when I'm going to black music club nights, I don't see anybody checking for. I'm sorry, they weren't checking for Prince. I didn't hear.
You know why?
I didn't see him buying the record, but it's pop. It was pop people who were buying them.
Well, here's the thing. Well, in R&B, here's it is. When you look at black music, right, you're gonna have black music kind of like taps out. When you look at gold sales of 500,000. So when you start looking at, when your records start climbing into the millions and millions of copies of sales, of course, you're touching the world. But I'm going to tell you, man, that here in America, between that, I mean, they were eating his records up, man. But the thing about it is that at a certain, but you got to be of a certain age. So if a person is like maybe 30 and under, I can easily say maybe 45 and under. If you're coming up where post 80s, that's your music. Yeah, Prince is not going to be on your radar because Prince is kind of like, he kind of faded out, even though he was still doing his thing. And that's why I removed Prince and had Jam and Lewis in there, because I did have Prince on my list, but Jam and Lewis were able to keep the sound going in a time period where Prince was losing ground. Now, mind you, keep in mind that a lot of records that they're known for, Prince is the spark of a lot of those records, man. But I think Prince, this is a guy, you putting out albums every year. You look at, but at the same, it's not conventional R&B, but R&B has never been conventional. It's only been conventional in the 80s, where it was like it had to be either the slick pop sound, it had to either be Quiet Storm, or it had to be like very soulful. So Prince could do all of those things, but he wasn't one thing. But I understand why you're saying that, though.
Well, listen, I get what you're saying. If there's any Prince fans gonna come for me on this podcast, I've got every album he's done. I even busted big money on the Crystal Ball 3 CD set. the rarities. I've got the lot, so don't come. I'm just saying,
Okay.
well, as I saw it growing up. But Prince is amazing. There's no question. But anyway,
Yeah. So I mean,
hours, guys, nearly 2 hours. We need to leave the viewers wanting more now, I think.
yeah. So I mean, what we've you know, it's having a top 20 list is it's never easy. Loads of people got left out. Mewtwo, Corey Rooney, Mike Morales, because they did a lot of the Mary stuff. There was KG from Naughty by Nature who did all the Jaheim next. I had him down on my list. Um, we talked about Chucky Thompson. Tim and Bob. Goodness, I had to remove him from my list. So there's many people that we mixed out. We missed out, and so we're gonna have another. We're gonna go through this again. We'll probably have a very different time frame or different parameters. But guys, it'll be great in the comments if you could post your top 20 in order of from 20 up to 1, so we can see that and we can comment on your stuff. But we want to thank you guys for all those guys, all of you guys who joined in. I mean, people would say, "How come you guys didn't have Stevie Wonder?" And that's personal taste as well. So it's been great, Stevie.
I mean,
it's been great.
Let's end it there, folks.
Yeah.
We'll end up in another hour here.
It's definitely been great. So we will be back in due time. But till then, please post your top 20. Let us see what you have. And
please share the podcast as well. Let's share it, like it, whatever you got to do. Tell your friends. Bring some more Prince fans along. Bring some more Teddy fans.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah. But anyway, guys. So until next time, we'll see you guys. Take care.
This was fun. Yeah, this was great.